There's a hydrangea in somebody's yard right now that will not bloom next June. Big leaves, deep green, not a spot on it. And next summer its owner will stand there wondering what went wrong. Nothing went wrong. Somebody tidied it up in September. 7 plants today. A few honestly do need a cut before this month is out. A few need only a light cleanup. And 2 are already holding next spring inside their stems. And the smartest thing your hands can do is stay in your pockets. Green light, yellow light, red light. That's how we'll sort your whole yard. And September 30th is not your deadline. Your real deadline is a different date in every backyard in America, and I'll show you where to find yours. Most pruning advice is written as a list of chores. Do this in September, do that in October. And it never gives you the one thing that would let you make the call yourself. Standing in your own yard, in front of a plant nobody wrote an article about. So before we get to a single plant, 3 questions. Question 1. Does this plant make its flowers on old wood or new wood? That sounds technical. It isn't. Old wood is the stems already standing out there right now. New wood is growth the plant hasn't made yet. Some plants build next year's flowers early and store them on those stems all winter. Cut the stem, you cut the flower. Others wait and build fresh in the spring, and you can cut those back hard while they sleep and lose nothing at all. Same shrub shape. Same green leaves. Completely opposite rules. Question 2. Is this growth still green and working, or has it finished its job? Green tissue is not decoration. As long as a leaf is green, it's still bringing in energy and sending it back down into the roots and the crown. Brown, spent, collapsed tissue has already handed in its notice. Learning to tell those apart, by eye, is most of this video. And question 3. How close are you to your first frost? Hold on to that one. We'll come back to it, and it's going to reframe everything the first 2 questions told you. Let's start where you can actually see the answer. Go stand over your lavender. Not from the porch, right over it. Push your fingers into the middle of that mound and part it open. You'll see 2 different plants in there. On top, soft gray-green needles, leaves all up and down the stems. Underneath that, closer to the crown, bare wood. Gray, brown, knuckly, no leaves at all. The line where those 2 meet. That's your green line. And that line is the most useful thing in your lavender patch. Anything above it, you can shape. Below it, you're on your own, because lavender does not readily push new growth from old bare wood. Iowa State's Extension Office puts it plainly: avoid cutting into the woody portions, because the plant doesn't reliably regenerate from them. Now, you'll hear people say one snip into the wood kills the plant forever, and that isn't quite honest. What's true is quieter and more useful. A stem you cut below its living leafy growth may simply never fill back in. It just stands there, bare, year after year. And a lavender full of bare stubs is a lavender you eventually pull out. So the rule is easy. When you're unsure, cut higher. You can always take a little more next summer. You cannot put leaves back on a bare stick. And that old woody lavender in the corner, the one split open in the middle and flopping sideways, you are not fixing that this afternoon. Hard renewal cuts on lavender are a gamble, and September is the worst time to gamble. Shape it lightly, enjoy it for what it is, and start a young one nearby. One more thing, and this is where our 3rd question starts earning its keep. Lavender that gets pruned late goes into winter more vulnerable, so extension guidance suggests putting the shears away roughly 6 weeks ahead of your first frost. If cold weather is closing in on you, do less. Just take the spent flower stalks, leave every leaf, and walk away. Lavender punishes you for cutting too low. The next plant punishes you for cutting the wrong generation entirely. Before anything else, one question, and it decides whether the next 3 minutes apply to you at all. When did your raspberries come in? If you picked in June or early July and the patch has been quiet since, you've got summer-bearing raspberries, and this is for you. If you're picking right now, late summer running toward fall, that's a fall-bearing patch. Different rules, different month. Leave it be. All right, summer-bearing folks, walk into that row and look at the canes standing next to each other. They're not the same age. They're not even the same generation. And in a good patch, they stand inches apart, leaning together, looking for all the world like the same plant. One of them fruited this summer. It came up last year, wintered over, gave you every berry you picked, and it has now finished the only job it will ever have. It's dying, on schedule, exactly as it should. The one beside it came up this spring. It has never fruited. And if you leave it alone, it is next June's breakfast. So how do you tell them apart without guessing? Look for fruit, not berries, the leftovers. The spent cane has side branches, and on the ends of those you'll find dried, brittle little stems where the berries hung. Those are your receipts. That cane already paid you. Then look at the bark. The spent one is duller, browner, often flaking. The new one is smoother, greener, softer under your thumb, with almost no side branching yet. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Cut the spent canes right down at ground level, get them out of the row, and leave every healthy new cane standing. Now here's the mistake that costs a whole year. Fall-bearing raspberries are famously easy. You mow the patch flat and start over. Somebody hears that, walks into a summer-bearing row with a mower, and takes next year's entire crop down with the dead stuff. Oregon State calls the correct job caning out, and it is selective. Never wholesale. And if you don't get to it this week, don't panic. This is a forgiving job. Extension guidance allows for removing spent canes any time from just after harvest through the dormant season. Sooner is better, mostly for airflow and light, and definitely sooner if you're seeing disease on those old canes. If this is already saving your patch, save the video too. There are plants later on this list where the rule reverses completely. Now let's go look at something that has nothing to do with stems. You've got a bearded iris clump that's been in the same spot a good long while. Foliage looks fine. Green fans, standing straight, nothing obviously wrong. But you noticed it this spring, didn't you? Fewer flowers than there used to be. Smaller. And the center of the clump has gone a little bald. Almost everybody reaches for fertilizer at that point. The plant looks hungry, so feed it. It usually isn't hungry. It's crowded. Bearded iris grow from thick horizontal stems called rhizomes, creeping along right at the soil surface. Each one pushes new growth out one end while the older section behind it runs out of steam. Give that a few years and you don't have a plant, you have a traffic jam. Spent rhizomes in the middle, new ones piled on each other around the edge, everybody fighting for the same square foot of sun. Illinois Extension recommends dividing every 3 to 5 years, right when flowering starts to fall off or the clump looks congested. And here's the insight that surprises people. More flowers can come from having fewer rhizomes competing in the same space. The job is simple enough. Lift the clump. Break it into pieces so each one has a firm rhizome, a fan of leaves, and a decent set of roots. Throw away anything soft, hollow, or tunneled through. Trim the leaf fans back as part of the division so the piece isn't losing water it can't replace. Then replant shallow. And I mean shallow. The top of that rhizome wants to sit right at the surface, barely covered, catching sun. Bury it deep and you tend to get lovely leaves and very few flowers. Now, timing. Iowa State and Illinois both name July and August as the best window, and the reason is roots. A division needs time to anchor before the ground goes cold, so if you're somewhere mild with weeks of decent weather ahead, September is workable. If you're up north and frost is breathing down your neck, don't force it. Write it on next July's calendar and let the clump have one more winter. It won't be the last time today that the right move is no move. And be kind to yourself doing it. One clump per afternoon is plenty. Pull up a stool, work sitting down, and drag the debris out on a tarp instead of carrying buckets. Peonies bloom for about 10 days and then take up space for 5 months, and every September somebody decides they've had enough of looking at them. I understand the impulse. Don't. Take a good look at that foliage. If those leaves are still green, they're still earning. Every sunny afternoon between now and hard frost, they're pulling in light and sending it down into the crown and those fat storage roots. That's next May's flowers being paid for, in advance. Cut healthy green peony foliage off in late summer and you're not tidying. You're closing the factory early. Iowa State makes the connection directly. Removing peony foliage prematurely in July or August weakens the plant, and you see it the following spring in the flower count. Now, disease. Peony leaves do get blotchy as summer wears on. Purple-brown patches, edges going crispy. And some of that overwinters in the debris and comes back at you. Penn State's guidance for growers is exactly the balance you want. Trim out and remove the genuinely diseased portions whenever you see them, and leave the healthy green foliage standing to keep working as long as it can. So it isn't all or nothing. Take the bad leaves, bag them rather than compost them, and leave the good ones working. When the whole plant goes yellow and flops after frost, that's your signal. Cut the stems to 1 inch or 2 above the soil and clear the bed. Now here's the part I really want you to have. If your peony puts out lush, healthy foliage year after year and gives you almost no flowers, stop blaming fertilizer and stop blaming your pruning. Go feel for the crown with your fingers and find out how deep those growth buds are sitting. Peonies are famously particular about this. Extension guidance puts those buds no more than 1 to 2 inches below the soil surface. Bury them deeper, and the plant spends everything it has just climbing to the light and rarely gets around to making flowers. And this happens to people who planted correctly. You top dress with compost a few springs in a row, mulch settles in around the crown, and you've slowly buried a plant that was perfectly happy. Lush leaves, no flowers, and it's been that way for years? Check the depth before you change anything else. All right, this is the one. Before you touch that hydrangea, I need you to answer a question, and it isn't should I cut it. It's, which hydrangea am I actually looking at? Because hydrangea is not one plant with one set of rules. The common garden types run on completely different schedules, and the September advice for one is the exact opposite of the September advice for another. Same word on the tag. Opposite instructions. So let's identify yours. No botany lecture. Big glossy leaves, flowers in a round pink or blue moth-head, or a flat lacy plate with florets around the rim? Bigleaf hydrangea, the most common one in American yards. Leaves genuinely shaped like oak leaves, cone-shaped white flowers, bark peeling like cinnamon? Oak leaf. Cone-shaped flower heads fading white to pink, smaller leaves, often trained up on a single trunk like a little tree? Panicle. Big round white heads that flop after a rain on a shrub that comes back from the ground each year? Smooth hydrangea. The Annabelle type. Now the split. Illinois Extension sorts them by one question: old wood or new wood. Big leaf and oak leaf. And climbing hydrangea too. Flower on old wood. They begin building next year's flower buds in August and September on the stems standing out there right now, which is why the guidance is to finish pruning those types shortly after they bloom, by around the 1st of August at the latest. Read that again. August 1st. We are past that. Minnesota says it just as plainly. Big leaf hydrangeas set next year's buds in late summer to early fall, so pruning belongs after flowering and before August. Clemson says the same for oak leaf. Panicle and smooth hydrangeas are a different animal. They flower on growth they haven't produced yet, so they get cut back in late winter or early spring, and you can be fairly bold about it without losing a thing. And there's an exception worth knowing: the reblooming big leaf varieties, the endless summer types and their relatives, flower on both old and new wood, which is why they'll bloom whether you prune them or not. So here's the honest takeaway, and it's bigger than hydrangeas. The word on the tag is not enough information to make a cut. If you can't confidently say which of those 4 you're standing in front of, don't make a major September cut just to make it look neater. Take the spent flower heads if they bother you, and leave the stems. Photograph the leaf before it drops, find out what you own over the winter, and prune it correctly next summer with confidence. Sometimes your last pruning decision of the season is the decision to put the pruners down. Now let me answer the question I opened with. There is no national pruning deadline. There never was. September in Minnesota and September in Georgia are not the same event. One has weeks of growing season left, the other is nearly done, and it matters beyond flower buds. Pruning is a stimulus. Cut a woody plant and it tends to answer by pushing out fresh, soft growth. Rutgers puts it plainly: prune shrubs late in the season and you may get growth that doesn't have time to harden off before winter, which sets that plant up for cold damage. Illinois and Montana states say the same, so the useful question isn't what month is it. It's how much growing season do I have left. Look up your average first frost date once. The Old Farmer's Almanac has a free lookup, and so does the Weather Service. Write it on the inside of your shed door and count the weeks. There's no single number that covers every plant. That 6-week guideline is specific to lavender, and I'd keep it there. The principle is what travels. The closer cold weather is, the more conservative your late-season pruning should be. The calendar tells you what month you're in. Your frost date tells you how much season is left. Quick word, because I've now told you not to cut about 6 different things, and I don't want you standing out there paralyzed. Dead wood, clearly diseased material, and badly damaged or broken branches are a separate conversation from shaping. That's not styling a plant, that's plant health, and it can generally be handled when you find it, whatever the calendar says. The line is simple. Removing something because it's dead, sick, or broken is usually fine. Removing something because the shrub looks a little shaggy, That's the one with a season attached to it. There's a lilac out behind a lot of houses in this country, been there longer than the people living in them. And every fall it gets looked at the way you look at a hedge that's gotten away from you. I'll clean it up before winter, tighten it in, take the top off. Here's what I need you to know before you do. Lilacs are spring bloomers, and spring bloomers plant early. Right after those flowers faded back in May, that shrub got to work building next spring's flower buds on the wood it grew this year. They've been sitting out on those stems for months. They are on the plant right now, while you're watching this. The University of Minnesota puts it about as directly as an extension office can. Lilacs develop next year's flower buds after blooming in the current year, which is why the pruning belongs immediately after they finish flowering. Prune in late summer, fall, or winter, and you take the flower buds with you. So when you shear a lilac in September, nothing looks wrong. Nothing browns, nothing wilts. It doesn't give you a single sign that anything happened. You just don't find out until May. And that's the cruel part of it. You can finish October standing back from a beautifully shaped, perfectly healthy lilac, feeling good about the work, and then spend the following spring staring at a tidy green shrub, wondering where the flowers went. Nothing connects the two in your mind. They're 7 months apart, so in September, no hedge trimmer, no reshaping for neatness, no taking a foot off the top because it leans toward the driveway. What you can do is what we just talked about. Genuinely dead stems, obviously diseased wood, a branch that split in a storm. And if the shrub really has outgrown its spot, that's a renewal job, taking out some of the thickest old stems at the base over about 3 years, and it belongs in the dormant season or right after bloom. Write it on the calendar for late May, right after the fragrance fades. That's your window, and it's a generous one. Our last plant is different from every one so far. With this one, you can cut it, you can leave it, or you can do both. And all 3 answers are correct. Coneflowers put people in a strange little standoff with themselves every autumn. Half of you wants to cut the spent stems down because the bed looks tired and you know it'll look worse. The other half read that you're supposed to leave the seed heads for the birds, and now you feel a little guilty holding the shears. It's a false choice. Split the difference. Deadhead where appearance actually matters to you. The front edge of the bed, along the walk, the part you see from the kitchen window. Tidy that. Then leave the rest standing. The back of the border, the interior of the clump, the part nobody photographs. And what you get for the half you leave alone is worth having. New Hampshire's Extension Office recommends this exact approach for fall cleanup. Pull and discard diseased top growth, but leave healthy seed heads standing. In a hard winter, those dried heads are a reliable food source for the finches, chickadees, juncos, and jays that stay through the cold. If you've never watched a goldfinch work, a coneflower head in January, sitting on that stiff stem in a wind that's bending everything else in the yard, taking the seeds out one at a time, you've got that coming. You also get structure. Those stems stand up under snow and give you something to look at in a season with not much left. And you'll get some volunteer seedlings next spring, which you can move, give away, or pull. Then cut the rest back in early spring, before the new growth pushes. Tidy where it matters. Generous where it doesn't. That's the whole strategy. So let's put this in your hands, because none of it counts until you're outside. Tomorrow morning, take your coffee and your pruners and walk the yard. Not to work, to sort. Every plant you pass gets one of 3 labels. Green light. There is a real, specific cut to make here. Yellow light. Clean up what genuinely needs cleaning up and leave the rest alone. Red light. Hands off. Whatever's bothering me about this plant, September is not when I fix it. And for anything you're unsure about, the 3 questions. Old wood or new wood? Still green and working? Or finished? How close am I to my first frost? Here's where our 7 land. Green light, lavender, shaped lightly above the green line, if you've still got real time before frost. Spent raspberry canes in a summer-bearing patch. The ones with dried fruit stems on them. And iris division, if you're mild enough to give those pieces time to root. Yellow light, peony. Take the sick leaves. Leave the green ones working. Wait for the natural dieback. And coneflower. Half tidy, half standing. Red light, bigleaf and oakleaf hydrangea, and lilac. All 3 are holding next spring on the wood you're looking at. Dead, diseased, or broken material only. And notice what happened across those 7 plants. You didn't learn 7 chores. You learned that the question is never how much should I cut. It's what is this particular plant doing right now, And can I see it? Every one of those was visible to the naked eye. A green line in a lavender mound, a dried fruit stem on a cane, a hollow spot in an iris clump, a leaf that's still green, a leaf shaped like an oak leaf. You didn't need a soil test or a single thing you don't already own. Here's what makes gardening hard to learn, and it isn't the plants. It's that the bill comes late. You make a decision on a warm afternoon in September and the garden doesn't argue. It doesn't wilt. It doesn't complain. It waits until May, long after you've forgotten what you did, and then it either hands you flowers or it doesn't. Which means the best gardener in September usually isn't the one with the fullest bucket of clippings at the end of the day. It's the one who stood in front of a shrub, understood what it was carrying, and had the patience to leave it alone. If you'd like the reminder to show up before the window closes instead of after, subscribe. That's what this channel is for. Next month we'll talk about fall cleanup, and one very common habit that makes a garden harder to keep healthy the following year, not easier. Until then, go take a look at your hydrangea. Just look. I'll see you out there.